Okay, so today we are diving deep into one of the biggest mysteries out there. How does that 3-pound lump of tissue between your ears take a chaotic storm of information and create the single, unified, technicolor movie you call reality? Let's get into it. This quote just nails it, doesn't it? I mean, your brain is constantly getting bombarded with raw data. Light hitting your eyes, vibrations in your ears, pressure on your skin. But that is not what you experience, right? You experience a world where everything just fits. It all makes sense together. So the big question is, how? And that right there is the central question. It's what scientists call the binding problem. And honestly, trying to solve it takes us right to the heart of what consciousness even is. This is the case we're cracking today. All right, so like any good detective, our first step is to carefully examine the scene. And in this case, the scene is your own mind, this incredibly smooth, perfectly stitched together reality that, let's be honest, we all totally take for granted every single day. I mean, think about it for a second. When you see a red ball bounce, you don't experience redness, and then a moment later, roundness, followed by motion, and then finally the thud of the sound. No way. It all happens at once. It's just a bouncing red ball. That seamless, effortless integration is the magic trick we're here to figure out. And now for our first major clue. And this is a big one because it's a total twist. While your experience of the world feels totally unified, your brain is, well, it's anything but. It's fundamentally, physically divided. So just look at this breakdown. It's like different departments in an office that are in totally separate buildings. The color and motion of that bouncing ball, that's being handled way in the back of your head, in the occipital lobe. The thud sound, that's processed over on the sides, in your temporal lobes. And the feeling of its rubbery texture, that's happening way up top, in the parietal lobe. They are physically separate. So the most obvious answer, the one you'd think makes the most sense, that there's gotta be some central command center, right? A little theater in your head where a tiny you sits and watches the whole show unfold. Well, that idea has been completely and utterly debunked. Neuroscientists have looked everywhere for this Cartesian theater. It's just not there. It doesn't exist. And this really gets to the core of the problem. If all the sensory actors are performing in different locations, and there's no director in a central control room watching all the monitors, then how in the world do you end up with one single coherent film? Let's take a look at the main suspects that science has rounded up. Okay, it's time to check out the suspect lineup. Over the years, neuroscientists and philosophers have come up with some really clever theories to try and explain how this whole binding process might actually be happening. So here are the 4 heavy hitters. First up, you've got temporal binding. The idea here is that timing is everything. Neurons in different parts of the brain that are processing the same object all fire at the exact same rhythm, in sync, kind of like a choir singing the same note. Next, there's the Global Workspace theory. This suggests that attention acts like a giant broadcast system. Whatever's important gets put on a global stage for the whole brain to see at once. Then you have predictive coding, which totally flips the script. It says your brain is constantly just guessing what's out there, and it only uses your senses to check its work and make corrections. And finally, we have the most radical idea of them all, multiple drafts. And just to quickly clarify that whole attention idea, there are really 2 big models competing. The classic one is the spotlight model, imagining attention as this narrow beam that just picks out one thing at a time. But the more recent workspace model is a bit different. It's less like a spotlight and more like a shared stage, where the most important information is broadcast to the entire audience of the brain, allowing for that unified processing. Which brings us back to that really wild suspect I mentioned, an idea championed by the philosopher Daniel Dennett. The multiple drafts model basically says that unified movie you think you're watching, it's an illusion. Your brain is constantly creating multiple competing versions or drafts of reality. The one you actually experience as now is just the version that happens to win out for a split second, edited on the fly. There is no final cut. So we've got our theories, we've got our suspects, but to really understand how a system works, sometimes the best evidence comes from seeing what happens when it breaks. So now it's time to hear some witness testimony. So let's look at split-brain patients. These are people who, usually to treat extreme epilepsy, have had the main data cable connecting their brain's 2 halves, the corpus callosum, severed. And the results, as studied by people like V.S. Ramachandran, are just mind-blowing. The 2 sides of the brain can start to act completely independently of each other. And here's the absolute kicker. the results can be two separate streams of awareness, two consciousnesses, in one person. Seriously, one hemisphere might want to wear a blue shirt, the other a red one, and the person's hands can literally get into a fight over which one to pick. This is probably the most powerful evidence we have that our solid feeling of being a single, unified self is actually a very delicate, very fragile construction. And we also see tragic evidence of binding failure in conditions like schizophrenia. In these cases, the very mechanisms that are supposed to link thoughts, perceptions, and a sense of self can start to break down, which can lead to a deeply fragmented and confusing experience of the world. It's just another stark reminder of how absolutely critical this binding process really is. So, after looking at all the evidence, after interviewing all the suspects, what's the verdict? Well, the truth is, this case is still very much open. We have some fantastic clues, some really compelling theories, but no definitive answer. And the implications of finally solving it are, well, they're absolutely massive. And this isn't just some abstract puzzle for scientists in a lab. It matters big time. I mean, for artificial intelligence, how could we ever hope to build a truly conscious AI if we can't even figure out this fundamental binding process? For philosophy, it forces us to ask, what even is the self if it's just a temporary bundle of separate parts working together? And from an evolutionary perspective, maybe this entire incredibly complex system evolved for one very simple reason: to survive. To make one fast, unified decision when it really matters. Do I fight or do I run? So, I'm going to leave you with this one final thought to chew on. That solid, continuous, undeniable feeling of being you, living in a single, coherent world. Is that a true window into reality? Or is it simply the most convenient, the most effective, the most useful story that your brain has ever learned to tell itself? The investigation continues.